The town of Red Hollow had always feared silence more than gunfire. Gunshots ended quickly, but silence lingered, crawling through alleys and saloons like cold smoke. That was why everyone looked away when the rider came over the ridge at dusk. He wore a black dust coat, broad hat tilted low, and a rifle strapped across his back. His horse moved slow, deliberate, like it understood the weight of the man it carried. No one needed to ask who he was. Cade Mercer had returned. 5 years ago, he and his younger brother, Elias, had ridden out of Red Hollow with dreams bigger than the desert itself. Elias had laughter that could fill a church hall, while Cade had always spoken with his eyes and fists more than words. Then only Cade came back, and only to bury their mother before vanishing again into the frontier. Now he returned with something darker than grief: revenge. Word had traveled through cattle trails and poker tables that Elias Mercer was dead in the mining territory north of Carson Pass, shot in the back during a failed robbery. Yet those who knew Elias swore he was no outlaw, honest to a fault, too trusting for his own good. And always beside him, until 3 nights before his death, had been a woman named Clara Vale, the same Clara who disappeared with his money, his horse, and whatever trust he had left. By the time Cade learned the tale, Clara had become a ghost story men told over whiskey. Beautiful, clever, dangerous. The woman who betrayed Elias Mercer. Cade had spent 6 months following rumors, gathering names, studying maps, speaking little. Every trail led here, Red Hollow, the place where Clara had once lived before she vanished into the west. He tied his horse outside the rusted Spur Saloon and stepped inside. Piano music died mid-note. Cards froze in mid-air. Even the bartender swallowed hard before forcing a smile. Cade removed his gloves, finger by finger, eyes scanning faces. "Whiskey," he said. One word, gravel-deep, enough to remind them he could speak when needed. He drank without tasting it. Then he placed a folded photograph on the bar. It showed Elias smiling beside a dark-haired woman whose eyes carried secrets even in stillness. "Seen her?" he asked. Nobody answered. Cade's jaw tightened. Then an old ranch hand in the corner muttered, "You don't want to chase Clara Vale, son." Cade crossed the room slow as thunder. "Why?" The old man's gaze trembled. "Because men who chase her end up dead, or wishing they were." Cade leaned closer. "Then I'll fit right in." The saloon breathed again only after he stepped back. Finally, the bartender spoke. "She was here 2 months ago. Bought supplies. Rode south toward Widow's Creek." Cade nodded once, slid a coin across the bar, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, a voice from the staircase cut through the room. "If you're hunting Clara Vale, you'll need more than bullets." Everyone turned. A woman in a crimson dress descended the stairs with the confidence of trouble itself. Lena Cross, owner of the saloon and collector of secrets. She stopped before Cade and looked him over. "You're Elias's brother." Cade said nothing. She smiled sadly. "He talked about you often." Cade's stare sharpened. "Then tell me where Clara is." Lena's smile faded. "I can tell you where she was. But if you find her, ask questions before you pull the trigger." Night settled over Red Hollow like a funeral cloth. Cade rented a room but did not sleep. He sat by the window, cleaning his revolver, while memories clawed through him. Elias at 12, chasing calves with a stick horse. Elias at 17, bleeding from a broken nose after defending Cade in a bar fight. Elias at 26, letter in hand, writing that he'd found someone worth settling down for. Clara. In that letter he'd sounded happier than Cade had ever known him. Weeks later came the news of betrayal and death. Cade had replayed it 1,000 ways. Clara seducing Elias, Clara stealing from him, Clara handing him to killers. The details shifted, but the ending never changed. His brother in the dirt, alone, just before. Dawn, a soft knock came at the door. Cade opened it to find Lena holding a lantern. "If you're smart, you'll ride away," she said. "I've never been accused of that." She sighed and entered uninvited. "Clara stayed here once. She cried in her room all night." Cade's expression did not move. Actors cry too. Lena stepped closer. "You loved your brother." "I understand. But hate can blind a man worse than sandstorms." Cade looked out the window. Then I'll ride blind. Lena studied him a moment, then handed him a scrap of paper. A map line marked through canyon country toward Widow's Creek. There's an abandoned church there. Last I heard, she was hiding nearby. Cade took it. Why help me? Lena answered softly, because Elias saved my life once. And because if Clara dies before telling the truth, 3 graves will stay unmarked. Cade finally looked at her. What truth? But Lena had already turned for the door. Find her, she said. Then decide who deserves burying. By sunrise, Cade Mercer was already riding through broken canyon country where the wind sounded like whispers trapped in stone. Widow's Creek was less a town than the bones of one, collapsed cabins, dry wells, and a church whose bell tower leaned like a drunk too stubborn to fall. Tracks circled the place, one horse, lightweight, recently shod. Cade dismounted and moved through the church doors with revolver drawn. Dust floated in colored shafts through cracked stained glass. At the altar stood a woman in a faded blue coat, hands resting calmly on an old Bible, dark hair braided back, eyes sharp as winter steel. Clara Vale, she did not startle when she saw him. You look like him, she said quietly. Elias had kinder eyes. Cade's finger tightened on the trigger. You don't get to speak his name. Clara nodded once, as if accepting the blow. Then shoot me and be done with it. Her calmness enraged him more than pleading would have. You stole from him. Led killers to him. Left him in the dirt. Clara's jaw trembled for the first time. No, she whispered. I tried to save him. Cade crossed the aisle in 2 strides and slammed her against a pillar. Lie again, and I'll bury you under this floor. She met his fury without flinching. If I wanted to lie, I would beg. He bound her wrists and forced her outside. She mounted her horse under gunpoint, and they rode north through narrow ravines. Cade intended to bring her back to Red Hollow alive, so the town could hear her confession before he ended her. But the desert had other plans. Gunfire cracked from the ridge above. Clara shouted, Down! Cade barely moved before a bullet tore through his hat brim. 3 riders descended hard and fast, faces wrapped in bandanas. Clara kicked free of her stirrup and threw herself behind a boulder. Cade rolled beside another, firing twice. 1 rider dropped. Another wheeled wide, trying to flank them. Clara somehow slipped a knife from her boot, despite bound wrists, and cut herself free. She snatched the fallen man's rifle and fired, clean through the second attacker's shoulder. The last man fled. Silence returned in ragged breaths. Cade stared at Clara, rifle smoking in her hands. Why didn't you run? He demanded. She looked at him with something like exhaustion. Because they would have killed you, and because they're the same men who killed Elias. They dragged the wounded attacker into the shade, and Cade pressed a boot to his throat. Who sent you? The man spat blood and laughed. Boss says Mercer blood should have ended with the first brother. Cade leaned closer. What boss? The man's grin faded when Clara knelt beside him. Tell him about Nathan Crow, she said softly. Fear flashed across the attacker's face. He bit down hard, choking on something hidden in his tooth. Foam touched his lips. Within seconds he was dead. Cade cursed and stepped back. Clara stood slowly. Nathan Crow owned the mine camp where Elias died, smuggler, judge buyer, killer with a banker's smile. Cade's eyes narrowed. And your part in it? She looked toward the horizon. I worked for Crow once, until I learned what he did to men who trusted him. Cade wanted to hate her, yet the bullets in the canyon had changed something. If Crow wanted them both dead, then the story he'd believed was missing pages. Still, mistrust rode beside him as they made camp that night under a ruined overhang. Clara sat opposite the fire, hands free now, but watched. Why did Elias trust you? Cade asked after a long silence. Her answer came barely above the flames. Because he was the first good man I ever met. Rain began after midnight, rare and cold. Cade remained awake, sharpening a knife while Clara stared into darkness. At last she said, You deserve the truth, even if it makes you kill me slower. She told him how she had once been forced into Nathan Crow's service, keeping ledgers, carrying messages, luring fools into contracts they could never repay. Crow preferred chains made of paper. Then Elias Mercer arrived at the mining camp with savings from cattle, drives and dreams of buying land. He planned to marry Clara and leave with her. Crow pretended friendship, offering partnership in a silver claim. Elias believed honest work could be found anywhere. Clara tried to warn him, but Crow watched every move. When Elias discovered the mine was a front for stolen payroll shipments and murdered laborers, he swore to expose it. "That was the night I told him to run," Clara said, voice breaking. "He said he wouldn't leave without me." She described the final hours with a pain no performance could fake. Clara stole Crow's account book, the proof. Elias needed and hid money and horses for escape. But one of Crow's men saw her. They seized Elias before dawn, beat him, and demanded the ledger. Clara was given a choice: lead Crow to the book or watch Elias die slowly. She lied, sending them toward an empty ravine while cutting Elias loose in the chaos. They ran for the stables. Shots rang out. Elias shoved Clara behind a trough just as a bullet struck his back. He fell but still fired twice, buying her seconds. "He told me to go," she whispered. "He said if one of us lived, Crow could still be ruined." Tears slid down her face unnoticed. I hated myself for obeying. Cade's hands had stopped moving long ago. The knife lay forgotten beside him. At dawn, Clara handed Cade a wrapped bundle she had carried for months. Inside was Elias's pocket watch, cracked but working, and a letter stained brown with old blood. Cade unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Brother, if this reaches you, trust Clara. I know what it looks like. Don't let anger make you blind like it did Pa. Finish what's right, not what feels good." Cade read it 3 times, then stood and walked into the rain until he could breathe again. Every mile of vengeance he had ridden now felt poisoned. He had hunted the wrong prey. When he returned, Clara was saddling horses. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Crow moves shipments through Black Mesa tomorrow," she said. "With the ledger and your brother's letter, we can end him." Cade met her gaze fully for the first time. "You're not riding alone." Clara searched his face. "Do you forgive me?" Cade mounted up. "No," he said honestly, "but I believe you." Then, after a pause, "Maybe that's where forgiveness starts." Black Mesa rose from the desert like a fortress built by God and improved by devils. Crow's compound sat among red cliffs with guards, wagons, and a processing mill that laundered stolen silver into respectable wealth. Cade and Clara watched from a ridge as armed riders moved below. "Too many for a straight fight," Clara said. Cade checked his rifle. "Then we make it crooked." They waited until dusk, slipped through an arroyo, and cut loose the mule pens. Braying chaos erupted across camp. Men shouted, chasing animals through dust. Cade used the confusion to reach the main office while Clara headed for the telegraph shack to summon federal marshals with evidence from the ledger. Inside the office, velvet curtains and polished wood mocked every grave Crow had dug. Nathan Crow stood behind a desk pouring whiskey as if expecting company. Tall, silver-haired, clean-handed, the sort of villain towns called respectable. "Cade Mercer," Crow smiled. "You look more dangerous than your brother did." Cade leveled his gun. He looked honest. "That was enough." Crow spoke while inching toward a drawer. "Your brother was stubborn. Wouldn't sell the letter he found. Wouldn't leave the girl." Cade fired first, splintering the drawer and the hidden pistol inside. Crow staggered back. "You had him killed from behind," Cade said. "No," Crow replied, blood on his teeth. "I merely taught him the price of interfering." Rage nearly finished Cade then and there, but Elias's letter burned in his mind. Finish what's right, not what feels good. He marched Crow outside at gunpoint just as Clara emerged with smoke behind her. The telegraph sent. Guards disarmed, camp in panic. Crow laughed suddenly. "You think this ends me?" "Judges dine at my table." Clara stepped forward and struck him across the face. "Then they can dine in prison." Before Cade could bind him, a hidden sniper on the mill roof fired. The bullet struck Clara high in the shoulder, spinning her to the dirt. Cade dropped Crow and shot the sniper in one motion. Crow ran for a horse. Cade chased through firelight and screaming mules, tackling him beside the loading ramp. They crashed into crates, fists and elbows trading like hammers. Crow fought dirty, drawing a knife and slashing Cade's side. Cade headbutted him, seized the knife and pinned Crow against the rail. One thrust would end it. Crow wheezed, terrified at last. "Do it," he spat. "Become what your father was." Cade froze. Their father had indeed died a bitter drunk, murdering over old grudges. Slowly, Cade threw the knife aside and knocked Crow unconscious instead. Moments later, whistles sounded from the canyon below. Marshals were arriving. 3 weeks later, Red Hollow gathered in the square to watch Nathan. Crow hauled in chains toward the territorial court. Ledgers had named bribed officials, stolen shipments, and murder payments. Half the county would fall with him. Townsfolk who once whispered Clara Vale's name with contempt now lowered their eyes when she passed. Some shame cannot be spoken aloud. Cade stood apart near the hitching rail, hat low, saying nothing. He had become a hero in the stories already spreading, but he wanted none of it. Clara's arm remained in a sling, yet she walked with steadier steps than before, as if surviving truth weighed less than surviving lies. She stopped beside him. "You could stay," she said. "People would give you land, work, gratitude." Cade glanced at the crowd. "I've never trusted gifts that come after gunfire." Lena Cross joined them, smiling. "Then take the one gift nobody can fake." She handed Cade a deed. Elias had once paid the first installment on a small ranch north of town. With Crow exposed, the fraudulent debt against it vanished. The land legally belonged to the Mercer family. Cade stared at the paper for a long moment. His brother had truly planned a future here. Not riches, not revenge, a home. He looked at Clara. "Would he have wanted you there?" She answered through tears she did not hide. "Only if you did too." The wind moved softly through the street. For once, silence felt gentle. Months later, travelers passing the northern ridge spoke of a quiet ranch, where 2 riders worked sunrise to dark. One was a scarred cowboy who said little, but whose eyes no longer carried storms. The other was a woman with steel in her spine, and kindness she guarded carefully. Some evenings laughter could be heard from the porch, rare, startled laughter, as if neither quite believed they still owned such a thing. Cade never forgot Elias. He kept the cracked watch in his pocket, and the letter by his bed. But vengeance no longer rode with him. He had hunted the woman who betrayed his brother, only to learn she had carried his brother's last hope across deserts and bullets. In the end, the silent cowboy discovered that truth speaks loudest to those willing to listen.